Tallahassee, Florida, a quiet suburb where life usually flows peacefully and measured. But one day, something happened that shook the entire community. A local university professor was found unconscious in the driveway of his own house, bleeding profusely. This man is Daniel Eric Markle, a father of 2 young boys who had everything to live for. The police found themselves at a dead end. No evidence, no suspects, no DNA, only one unreliable witness. It became clear that this case would not be simple and quick. It would require all the experience and patience of the investigators to solve it. Dan was born in 1972 in Toronto, Canada. He was a smart and successful man. He studied at prestigious universities, including Cambridge, and in 2001, he received a law degree from Harvard. After that, he worked as a clerk at a law firm for several years. In 2005, he got an opportunity he couldn't pass up. The University of Florida's law school was looking for a professor with the same qualifications as Dan. He jumped at this chance and was a perfect fit for his new career at the university. Daniel Markle had all the prerequisites for a happy life and a successful career. But unfortunately, one tragic event crossed out all his plans. On the one hand, Dan loved teaching, and on the other, he was in love with criminal law. Despite his busy schedule teaching various legal disciplines, he found time to write numerous works in the field of criminal law. But please, right now, subscribe to the channel, give this video a like, and write any comment to promote this video in YouTube algorithms. But it wasn't just career successes that brought joy to Dan's life. He met his love, Wendy Adelson, on a dating site for single Jews. Despite their age difference, Dan was 33 and Wendy was 26. They were a perfect match for each other. Wendy was also passionate about criminal law and later, just like Dan, started teaching at the University of Florida. Their relationship developed rapidly, and the couple couldn't wait to get married. In a short time, they got to know each other well, got engaged, and finally tied the knot on February 26, 2006. The couple lived an ideal life. They both had their dream jobs, a good income, and in 2009, they welcomed their firstborn, followed by a second son. In 2010, life seemed wonderful, and it continued that way until 2012, when their relationship fell apart and they divorced. It seemed that Dan and Wendy had everything for a happy family life: love, common interests, successful career, children. But sometimes, even in the strongest relationships, at first glance, cracks appear that lead to the destruction of the marriage. The couple carefully concealed all the details of their divorce, so no one knows for sure why their marriage fell apart. In 2013, they officially divorced, and the image they presented to the public did not reflect the real situation in their family at all. Once, Dan went on a business trip, and when he returned home, he was shocked by what he saw. The house was almost completely emptied out. Wendy left only a few things, including a mattress. It took her just a day, while Dan was away, to move everything out of the house. Usually, moving out of a house is a stressful process that requires careful planning. But judging by how far Wendy went in emptying their shared home, she had been thinking about it long before. This indicates the deplorable state their marriage was in. And as if that wasn't enough, Wendy left Dan another gift on the mattress: a stack of divorce papers. The divorce process was very difficult, and Wendy had plenty of reasons to be angry. Obviously, she did everything possible to cause Dan as much suffering as possible during this process. Divorce is always a painful process, especially when the couple cannot agree amicably. But such outright hostility and a desire to hurt a former partner is an alarming sign. Wendy went even further in her desire to erase Dan from her life and the lives of their children. She changed the children's last name to her maiden name, and even changed the name of one of her sons, which was given in honor of Dan's deceased relative. Friends, a very important point: creating such content requires a lot of time, and currently, my channel and I are going through a difficult financial situation. I would be immensely grateful if you become a sponsor of this channel and support me with your donation. In return, I will be able to personally respond to you in the comments and also mention your noble name in my video. So become sponsors, and I will be eternally grateful to you. The divorce was not easy for Wendy, and she made every effort to erase any mention of Dan. It's one thing when a couple realizes that they can no longer be together, but it's another thing entirely when children are involved. They will still have to maintain contact. Attempts to isolate children from one of the parents look like cruel revenge. In 2014, Dan and Wendy lived separately. Wendy took up writing and wrote a book about human trafficking based on her experience. But it seems that her approach to writing was different from Dan's. and the book turned out to be a complete failure. Critics described it as terribly bad, so it was hardly worth rushing to the bookstore for this masterpiece. On July 18, 2014, Dan, as usual, was heading to Wendy's house to pick up the children and take them to kindergarten. This was part of his usual daily routine. In divorce situations, one of the parties often starts behaving irrationally, driven by emotions, but it's important to remember that children should not become hostages of adult conflicts. They have the right to communicate with both parents, regardless of how the relationship between the former spouses turned out. That morning, Dan followed his usual routine. He went to the gym, stopped by a few stores, nothing unusual. But soon everything was about to change dramatically. Around 11 o'clock, Dan finished his business and returned home. As he was approaching his house, he noticed that someone was already waiting for him there. At that moment, Dan was talking to someone on the phone. This interlocutor later told the police about their conversation and what he managed to hear and understand. According to him, whoever the person waiting for Dan was, they had obviously set up an ambush. There was no dialogue between them. Only a loud bang rang out before Dan even had time to open the car door. The bullet flew through the driver's side window and hit Dan right in the face. The impact was so strong that his head was thrown back against the headrest. One of the neighbors accidentally heard the shot and saw a gruesome picture. Dan was sitting motionless behind the wheel, surrounded by broken glass, with the interior and windshield covered in blood. Without wasting a second, the neighbor called 911. In such situations, it is very important for eyewitnesses to immediately call the emergency services. Every minute can be decisive in saving a life, and although the neighbor acted absolutely correctly, unfortunately, it is not always possible to get comprehensive information from witnesses in a state of shock. The neighbor said that he saw a car pull into the driveway and then heard a shot. Looking out the window, he saw Dan in critical condition in the front seat of the car. The man was still alive but could not call for help. The neighbor also noted that he could not say with certainty whether it was a suicide attempt or if someone had shot Dan. But in any case, the victim needed immediate help. While the ambulance was on its way, the police tried to get all possible information from the neighbor. However, the only thing he could report was that he saw a silver Toyota Prius leaving the scene immediately after the shot. Of course, the police should have followed up on this lead, but it is quite possible that it was just a random car passing by. The medics arrived 19 minutes later and urgently transported Dan to the nearest hospital. Unfortunately, an unfortunate mistake occurred. The dispatcher who took the call from the neighbor did not convey the information about the victim's critical condition. That's why it took the ambulance so long to get to the scene. And with a gunshot wound to the face, every minute counts. Sometimes the smallest mistake or oversight can cost a person their life, especially when it comes to such serious injuries as a gunshot wound to the head. It's a pity that valuable time was wasted due to a lack of communication between the services. We will never know for sure whether the delay in the ambulance's arrival affected the tragic outcome, but the fact remains, Dan could not survive the injuries he sustained. He fought for his life in the intensive care unit for 14 hours, but unfortunately, his heart stopped. Now the police were faced with an incredibly difficult task. A man who seemingly had no enemies and was loved by many was ruthlessly shot dead on the doorstep of his own home. And the only lead was a mysterious silver Toyota Prius that might have been involved in the crime, or might have had nothing to do with it at all. Shortly after the tragedy, a memorial service was held in Dan's memory. That day, many people gathered. Friends, relatives, students, all those who wanted to express their love, respect, and gratitude to the talented professor. The police were at a crossroads. Without evidence or suspects, they needed to decide where to start the investigation. The first person to fall under suspicion was Dan's ex-wife, Wendy Adelson. She was called to the police station on the day of her husband's murder. Wendy was not arrested, but for the police, it was a starting point. Before the interrogation, the woman listened to a voice message from a friend who worked as a realtor. Often in investigations of this kind, the victim's closest people become the first suspects. And although this is not always fair, you have to start somewhere. Any little thing can be the key to solving the crime. In the voice message, the friend said, "Hey Wendy, I feel a little awkward telling you this, and I don't want to dramatize the situation, but there was a shooting today near your former house. I hope you're okay, my dear." It went on to say how sorry the friend was that Wendy had to find out about it this way. But the fact remains, there was a shooting near her former residence. The ex-husband was critically wounded and was unlikely to survive. Upon hearing this, Wendy became extremely upset and burst into tears. She said that she had been emailing Dan that morning and everything was fine. Then the woman asked the investigators what happened to her ex-husband. The police officer replied that he could not disclose any details until he found out where she was at the time of the shooting. This is a standard procedure to exclude her from the list of suspects. Wendy responded very emotionally, but at the same time, somewhat detached. She reported that she had only left the house at noon on some business. She even wanted to drive past her former street, but saw that it was blocked off. The behavior of suspects during the first interrogation can tell an experienced investigator a lot. Unnatural emotionality, excessive detachment, unnecessary detailing of their actions, all this may indicate a desire to hide something. However, people react differently to stress, so it is too early to draw final conclusions. When the police asked Wendy if she knew anyone who might wish Dan harm, she just continued to cry bitterly. Finally, she replied that although Dan sometimes didn't treat people in the best way, she couldn't imagine anyone daring to be so cruel to him. The investigator inquired whether Dan owed anyone money. Through tears, Wendy replied that in fact, it was her ex-husband who owed her money child support. Wendy seemed genuinely shocked by the tragedy. She was almost going crazy with grief. The officer conducting the interrogation treated her very carefully and sympathetically. The problem for the police was that they still had no solid leads. The robbery version seemed unlikely since the attacker did not try to enter Dan's house, did not search for valuables in his car or pockets. At that moment, the investigators had only one possible motive: revenge. But why would someone want to take revenge on Dan? Could Wendy be right in assuming that he might have offended someone or done something improper? It's one thing to annoy a person, but it's quite another to drive someone to the point where they would pull out a gun in broad daylight and shoot you in cold blood. In murder investigations, it is very important to correctly identify the motive for the crime. This helps narrow down the list of suspects and understand in which direction to move further. However, sometimes we are faced with situations where there is no rational motive, and then you have to dig deeper, look for non-obvious connections and hidden conflicts. In search of at least some leads, the police decided to appeal to the public. They made it clear this was a deliberate murder, and they announced an immediate reward for those who provide information that would help arrest and convict the criminals. The reward amount started at $10,000, but later increased to $25,000. Some time after the sworn testimony was made public, it turned out that, according to the investigators, the suspect Garcia had an accomplice, 33-year-old Luis Rivera. It was assumed that this couple left Miami on July 16, 17 in a rented silver Toyota Prius and moved around Florida. The police gathered snippets of information about these two: cell phone data, electronic records, video footage from surveillance cameras from various buildings and buses in the area. The video, it was believed, captured a couple who were following Dan Markle on July 18 as he went about his daily business, driving from kindergarten to the gym, then to the store and home. But why did these two suddenly become suspects? And why did they decide to kill a man with whom they seemingly had never crossed paths before? The police suspected that it was a contract killing. Someone paid Garcia and Rivera to kill Dan Markle. And most interestingly, this information came from a secret informant whose identity was never revealed. Thus, the key question remains unanswered. If it really was a contract murder, then who was the customer? It seems that the time has come to shed light on this mystery. Contract killings are perhaps the most difficult to investigate. After all, the real criminal hides behind the backs of the direct perpetrators. Finding a connection between the killer and the customer, proving their collusion, that's the real challenge for investigators. Especially if you have to work with anonymous informants whose motives are not always clear. No matter how much Garcia and Rivera were paid for their work, it turned out to be not enough for them to take all the blame. As soon as they realized that the game was over, they immediately began to sing like canaries during police interrogations. They told investigators that they were hired by none other than Charlie and Donna Adelson, the brother and mother of Dan's ex-wife. At first glance, these two were respectable members of society who together ran the Adelson Dental Clinic and Institute. By the way, I apologize if I mispronounced their last name. Charlie was a dentist, and Donna was in charge of patient care. It's hard to believe, but these testimonies alone were not enough to bring Charlie and Donna to justice. After all, as far as the police knew, the murder suspects could name any names in a desperate attempt to save their own skin. And what connection could there be between a respected family doctor, the owner of a dental clinic, and two hitmen from Miami? Strangely, it took a long time to unravel this tangle. In the end, the missing link turned out to be a woman named Catherine Magbanua. She not only had an affair with Charlie Adelson, but also had a previous relationship with Sigfrido Garcia, from whom she had 2 children. Phone records showed that almost immediately after Dan Markel's murder, Catherine received a call from Luis Rivera, probably to report that the order had been carried out. Catherine was the only connecting link between all the participants in the conspiracy. Rivera, Garcia, and Adelson claimed that they had never met each other in person before. For her services as an intermediary, Catherine received $100,000. After analyzing Magbanua's bank account, it was established that over 12 months, she made deposits amounting to tens of thousands of dollars. Often, the key to solving high-profile murders lies in seemingly insignificant details and minor figures. It is important not only to focus on the main suspects, but also to carefully track all their connections and contacts. After all, that's where you can find the missing puzzles that will make up the complete picture of the crime. These suspicious transactions on Catherine's account began a few months before Dan Markel's murder and continued for several months after the crime. Isn't this the height of recklessness? Interestingly, the payments were almost always made in the form of checks. Not the smartest move on the part of the Adelson family, don't you think? After all, checks are very easy to track for one simple reason: they always have a signature. And every such check deposited into Magbanua's account was signed by none other than Donna Adelson. Hatred is perhaps too strong a word, but in this case, it fits best. Donna Adelson openly hated her former son-in-law, especially in the months leading up to his murder. She bombarded Dan with emails, one after another, cursing him, insulting him, using her entire arsenal of swear words. In one particularly telling message, she wrote that Wendy had suffered too long being married to Dan. His narcissism had destroyed their marriage, so now it was time to strike at the most painful spot. The entire Adelson family lived in Miami, but Wendy settled separately in Tallahassee, near her ex-husband. She wanted to return to Miami to be closer to her family, but Dan was against it. Since Markel did not resort to threats or violence, he went to court and obtained a ban on Wendy moving with the children. The fact is that during the divorce, they agreed on equal custody of their sons. But there was another reason for the mother-in-law's dislike of Dan. Shortly before his murder, he again went to court with a petition that did not allow Donna Adelson to spend time alone with his children without his supervision. Of course, this in no way justifies Donna's actions because, as we know, the attempt on Dan's life was planned long before this petition was filed. As you can see, at first glance, everything seems quite obvious, doesn't it? An angry mother-in-law, an offended ex-wife. Motive is always a key element in murder investigations, and although family conflicts often cause violence, one should not jump to hasty conclusions. Sometimes, deeper reasons and darker secrets are hidden behind outward simplicity. The task of a detective is to remain impartial and check all versions, even if they seem obvious. The offense went too far, but one should not jump to conclusions. Luis Rivera nearly ruined the entire case. While in jail without the right to bail on other charges, Luis asked for a meeting with investigators. He stated that he had information that he was ready to exchange for a deal with the investigation. The detectives readily agreed to re-interrogate Rivera, and this is where Luis gave his version of events. According to him, he did not know that a murder was being planned until he got into the car with Garcia. He was allegedly told that it would be an ordinary robbery, and when he found out about the murder of Dan Markel, he was extremely dissatisfied. He said he only wanted to rob the woman who was supposed to pay for it. Rivera and Garcia were promised $35,000 each for the job, but Luis insisted that he was not going to kill a man, especially a father of many children, with whom he was not previously acquainted and against whom he had nothing. Rivera claimed that he had never even heard this man's name before and had not seen him until Garcia showed him a photo. As for the Adelsons, Luis allegedly did not know about them at all, but only referred to a woman named Katie, that is, Catherine. It was she, according to Rivera, who was the main person in this case, and he also mentioned that some woman wanted to get her children back and gain full custody of them. Up to this point, the Adelsons still denied any involvement in the murder, despite the fact that the police had checks signed by Donna. However, this does not yet prove her intention to kill Dan. The checks could have been written for many reasons. But at this moment, the FBI joined the case. They developed a special operation to catch this family. Charlie Adelson began to receive strange calls from an unknown number. The caller was a woman who introduced herself as Sandy. She asked why Rivera, while in prison, was not worried about what was happening, and why his family was not helping him on the outside. Charlie was clearly frightened by these calls, but he kept his composure long enough not to give himself away. Sandy, of course, was an undercover agent, and the FBI was tapping Charlie's phone, hoping to hear something that could be used against him. But for now, this attempt failed. In July 2016, a grand jury in Leon County charged Garcia and Rivera with first-degree murder. Catherine Magbanua was arrested a little later. Rivera, who was already serving a sentence for other crimes, managed to have the charges reduced to second-degree murder, obviously for cooperating with the investigation and pleading guilty. He was sentenced to 12 years for unrelated crimes plus 19 years for complicity in the murder of Dan Markel. The trials of Catherine Magbanua and Sigfrido Garcia were combined into one, which took place on October 19, 2016, since the charges against them were identical. The prosecution claimed that Charlie Adelson was the mastermind behind this whole dirty business. Allegedly, he promised $100,000 for Dan's murder so that his sister could gain sole custody of the children after the death of her ex-husband. At the trial, the prosecutor called an interesting witness, Jeffrey Lacasse, who, as it turned out, had once dated Wendy Adelson. Lacasse confirmed that he had heard from Wendy about how her brother Charlie had repeatedly discussed the possibility of hiring a killer to murder Dan. According to Jeffrey, on July 13, Wendy asked if she could entrust him with something confidential. Eventually, she said that Charlie had considered all possible options for solving her problem and talked about hiring a hitman. Wendy told Lacasse that getting rid of Professor Markel would cost about $50,000. At the trial, Sigfrido Garcia insisted that the fatal shot was fired by his partner Luis Rivera. But the problem is that Rivera claimed just the opposite. However, this was hardly enough to remove the first-degree murder charge from Garcia. He was found guilty and sentenced to life in prison without the possibility of parole, plus another 30 years for conspiracy. Garcia stated that he would appeal the verdict. As for Catherine, she categorically denied any involvement in the murder. At the same trial as Garcia, her charges were reduced to second-degree murder. But after 11 days of deliberation, the jury could not reach an agreement, so the judge was forced to declare a mistrial and order a new trial. Often during high-profile trials, unexpected twists occurred. Attempts by the accused to shift the blame onto each other, the appearance of new witnesses, conflicting testimonies, all this can significantly affect the course of the case. The task of the investigation and the prosecution is to carefully check each fact and not succumb to manipulation. Only in this way can a fair verdict be achieved. Catherine Magbanua was released on bail pending a new trial. It took over 6 years for Katie to finally face trial. The retrial began on May 16, 2022, and lasted 11 days. This time, the jury was more decisive. On May 27, 2022, Catherine Magbanua was found guilty of first-degree murder and solicitation to commit murder. She was sentenced to life in prison without the possibility of parole, plus an additional 30 years for participation in a criminal conspiracy and another 30 for solicitation. So even if Katie theoretically gets out of prison someday on a life sentence, she will still have to serve an additional 60 years behind bars. It is clear that the jurors were shocked by the details of this case. Many believe that two key figures, Wendy and Donna, were unfairly left at large, because of whom, most likely, everything happened. After all, it was they who planned and wished for Dan Markel's death. Well, we can only hope that justice will eventually catch up with them too. It is worth noting that this case and the verdicts handed down caused quite a stir in society. Opinions were divided. Some consider the punishment too lenient, while others consider it too severe. In conclusion, I want to say that Dan Markel certainly did not deserve such a terrible death. In the prime of his life, at 41, he could have done and achieved so much more. Colleagues and students remember him as a brilliant scientist and educator, the author of numerous works in the field of jurisprudence. And relatives and friends remember him as a sensitive son, brother, and friend. But above all, Dan loved his children. They were the meaning of his life. Perhaps that is why he so resolutely defended his parental rights in court, so that his little ones would never be separated from their father. Unfortunately, Dan was not destined to see his boys grow up. They will forever remember him as young and full of energy, and all because of the treachery of two people whose names Dan didn't even know and whom he had never seen in his life. Courtney Clenny, a young and attractive blonde who craved fame, found herself at the center of a scandal due to the tragic death of her boyfriend, Christian. Despite the girl's and her lawyer's claims of self-defense, the evidence gathered during the investigation points to a deliberate murder committed by Courtney. From the age of 13, Courtney, whose real name is Courtney Clenny, had a clear plan for achieving popularity. After moving with her family to Austin, Texas, she began her journey in show business by participating as an extra in films. The girl dreamed of becoming a Hollywood star and did not miss any opportunity, appearing in commercials for well-known brands such as Pepsi. The pursuit of fame and popularity from a young age can often lead to disastrous consequences, especially when ambition outweighs common sense and moral principles. Courtney understood that her attractiveness and charisma were powerful tools for attracting attention. She actively developed her career, appearing in music videos of popular performers and posing for the men's magazine Playboy. Later, she managed to land a few small roles on television and in movies. Hello everyone, my name is John Brooks, and you're watching the DBS channel. Today we're going to talk about a shocking case that left all of America on its feet. The path to fame often lies through the exploitation of one's own appearance and sexuality. However, this does not always lead to the desired result and can have dangerous consequences. Along with her career in the entertainment industry, Courtney became passionate about fitness. Moving to Los Angeles in 2017 was a turning point. Her popularity on Instagram skyrocketed, turning the girl into a millionaire blogger. Subscribers admired her perfect body and dedication to a healthy lifestyle. However, behind the ideal image on social media, there were problems in Courtney's personal life. Her relationship with Christian, which began in 2020, quickly grew from passion into a toxic mix of jealousy, control, and aggression. Despite the luxurious apartment in Miami and the seemingly carefree life, behind the scenes of the relationship, scandals and violence were raging. This is exactly what I'm going to tell you about in great detail right now, but only to those incredible people like you who subscribe to the channel right now, like this video, and write a big comment about what they think about Courtney. Courtney Clooney, in her pursuit of popularity, did not miss any opportunity. Starting from 2015, she began appearing in music videos of famous artists. It was an important step in her career, as it allowed her to gradually move from being an extra to more prominent roles in advertisements and music videos. The path to fame is rarely easy and often requires gradual advancement, taking advantage of every opportunity. At the same time, Courtney posed for the men's magazine Playboy, which undoubtedly added to her recognition. Later that year, she managed to land a few small roles on television and in movies, which was another step in her career. However, Courtney did not limit herself to just the entertainment sphere. She also became passionate about fitness and decided to try her hand in this field. In 2017, the girl took a bold step moving to Los Angeles. This decision turned out to be fateful as her popularity on Instagram skyrocketed, turning Courtney into a millionaire blogger. Subscribers were delighted with the beautiful and athletic girl who regularly shared her workouts and achievements. Courtney herself admitted that she was inspired by the example of another fitness model and decided to follow in her footsteps, participating in various fitness competitions. At these events, Courtney's body looked flawless, evoking admiration from the audience. Courtney's popularity on social media continued to grow rapidly, but it was not enough for the girl. She craved even greater fame and scale. It seemed that Courtney was ready to do anything to achieve her goal, and nothing could stand in the way of her ambitions. Unrestrained thirst for fame can cloud the mind and force a person to cross the line of what is allowed. It is important to stop in time and think about the price that will have to be paid for one's aspirations. Friends, a very important point in creating such content requires a lot of time, and right now my channel and I are experiencing financial difficulties. I will be immensely grateful if you become a sponsor of this channel and support me with your donation. And in return, I will be able to respond to you personally in the comments and also mention your noble name in my video. So become sponsors. I will be infinitely grateful to you. In her pursuit of even greater popularity and financial success, Courtney Clooney decided to take a bold step, create an account on the OnlyFans platform. This social network allows users to create closed communities where subscribers get access to exclusive content for a monthly fee. Most often, the most popular content on OnlyFans is adult material. Platforms like OnlyFans can become a tempting way for young and ambitious people to get rich quick. However, it is important to understand the potential risks and consequences associated with producing and distributing adult content. Courtney created her OnlyFans profile under the pseudonym Courtney Clooney, maintaining some anonymity. In her profile description, she stated that she works as a full-time fitness model and has two beloved dogs, Jessie and Ranger. The girl was fully aware of her attractiveness and charisma, which would help her attract and retain the attention of subscribers. According to some reports, Courtney managed to earn over $3 million thanks to OnlyFans alone. This impressive amount testifies to her popularity and the willingness of fans to pay for access to her content. Financial success on platforms like OnlyFans can create the illusion of easy money and endless opportunities. In March 2022, shortly before committing a terrible crime, Courtney became a guest on the comedy podcast We're Not Miami. During the interview, she jokingly called herself a crazy toxic girlfriend. Although it sounded like a joke, there is often a grain of truth in such statements. This statement by Courtney may indicate her awareness of her own problematic character traits and unhealthy patterns of behavior in relationships. Perhaps she considered her toxicity and craziness as something attractive or even funny, not realizing the real consequences of such an attitude. Self-irony and jokes about one's own shortcomings can be a way to hide real problems and avoid responsibility for one's actions. It is important to take alarming signals in a person's behavior seriously, even if they are presented in the form of jokes. The We're Not Miami podcast became a kind of harbinger of the tragic events unfolding in Courtney Clooney's life. Her joke about craziness and toxicity turned out to be a chilling prediction of the future, which, unfortunately, became a reality. During her appearance on the podcast, Courtney Clooney was quite frank about her preferences in men. Without any hesitation, she stated that she prefers to date exclusively wealthy black guys. Moreover, Courtney emphasized her dislike for any control or instructions from a partner, which indicates her independent and strong-willed character. Such candid statements about racial and financial preferences when choosing a partner may indicate a superficial attitude towards relationships and a potential tendency towards mercantilism. The victim in this tragic story was Christian, also known as Toby Oboms. Like Courtney, he was originally from Texas, but relatively little information is available about him. From the available data on social networks, it is known that Christian studied communications at Texas Tech University and was engaged in trading. Courtney and Christian met and started dating around 2020. Initially, they lived together in a hotel, but later moved to a luxurious apartment in a 53-story building in Miami. Their residence was located on the 23rd floor with a stunning view of the waterfront. The couple enjoyed all the advantages of a wealthy life, including a private elevator that took them directly to the door of their apartment. Despite Courtney's active presence on social media and her growing popularity, Christian was much more restrained in his online activities. He rarely appeared in public, and even in videos with Courtney, his presence was minimal. This may indicate his unwillingness to be in the spotlight or a certain discomfort with the publicity of their relationship. It seems quite strange that despite living together in a luxurious apartment in Miami, Courtney and Christian never flaunted their relationship on social media. Perhaps it was a conscious decision of the couple, or evidence of certain problems in their relationship that they tried to hide from prying eyes. The discrepancy between the public image and the real state of affairs in a relationship is often an alarming signal. If people excessively hide their personal life or avoid demonstrating their relationship, it may indicate the presence of serious problems or even abusive patterns of behavior. The luxurious apartment where Courtney Clooney and Christian Oboms lived was registered exclusively in the girl's name. According to available information, the monthly rent for this residence reached an impressive $10,000. At first glance, the couple enjoyed an ideal life of luxury and prosperity. However, behind the closed doors of their relationship, serious problems were hidden, invisible to the outside eye. An alarming signal about the unhealthy state of Courtney and Christian's relationship was the information about numerous police calls to their apartment. In the period from January 2022, when the couple moved into the apartment, until the moment of the tragedy, law enforcement officers were called at least 7 times. It is striking that all these incidents occurred within just 4 months of living together. On April 6, 2022, the world was shaken by the news of a brutal murder in this luxurious skyscraper. The media reported a fatally wounded man, but the name of the suspect in the crime had not yet been revealed. The police discovered the body of a 27-year-old victim with a fatal stab wound. Later, friends recognized the deceased as Christian Oboms and provided law enforcement with information that he lived in this building with his girlfriend, Courtney Clooney. The tragic death of a young person is always a great loss and shock for loved ones. It is especially chilling to realize that the murder took place in a place that was supposed to be a safe haven, one's own home. Initially, friends characterized Christian as a smart and energetic guy. However, as new details about his relationship with Courtney emerged, it became clear that behind the external gloss, there were serious problems. It turned out that the couple had experienced instances of both physical and moral abuse from both sides. In particular, one of the neighbors claimed to have witnessed Christian raising his hand against Courtney. At the same time, the couple's friends spoke of instances when they saw Courtney hit Christian. Domestic violence is a serious problem that, unfortunately, is often hushed up and ignored. Victims often feel ashamed or afraid to talk about their experiences, especially when the aggressor is their partner. It is important to remember that violence can never be justified, and everyone deserves a healthy and safe relationship. These testimonies paint a chilling picture of a toxic and abusive relationship that led to a tragic denouement. Despite the outward glitz and glamour, behind the doors of Courtney and Christian's apartment, a real drama unfolded, full of pain, suffering, and violence. Despite the perfect picture that Courtney Clooney and Christian Obums displayed on social media, the reality of their relationship was far from a fairy tale. It is enough to look behind the scenes of the glossy photos to discover the chilling truth: a toxic relationship full of violence and manipulation. One should not blindly trust the ideal images that people present online, because reality can be much darker and more painful. When information about Christian's potential killer became public, Courtney wasted no time and immediately hired a lawyer named Frank Prieto. The defense attorney immediately stated that the girl acted exclusively in self-defense and was herself a victim of domestic violence by Christian. Prieto claimed that on the day of the tragedy, Christian broke into the apartment without Courtney's permission, since the residence was registered only in her name, and the couple was allegedly separated and not living together at that time. The lawyer insisted that Christian's only purpose when he illegally burst into the apartment was to commit violent acts against Courtney. According to the defense attorney, the former partners had broken up a month before the horrible incident. Courtney's mother said that her daughter was afraid to even leave the house, as her ex-boyfriend was constantly trying to break down the door, and when he failed to do so, he slept right on the stairwell, waiting for an opportunity to get inside. Obsession and stalking by former partners is a serious problem that can escalate into tragedy. Victims often feel helpless and frightened, not knowing how to protect themselves from the aggressor. A few days before the tragic incident, the police were called to Courtney and Christian's apartment. Law enforcement officers noticed bruises on the girl's arms and legs, which could indicate the use of physical force. According to the defense version, Courtney stabbed Christian only after he knocked her to the floor and tried to grab her by the throat. This situation allegedly forced the girl to resort to radical measures to save her own life. However, despite all the lawyer's arguments, many questions and doubts remained about the veracity of this version of events. Was Courtney really a victim defending herself from an attacker, or was there something more sinister and premeditated behind it? Write your opinion in the comments. Christian Obums' family was shocked and outraged by the statements of Courtney Clooney's lawyer about self-defense. They categorically refused to believe that the knife wound that led to the death of their son and brother was justified and necessary for protection. Loved ones described Christian as a caring, kind, and athletic guy who could not pose a threat to his girlfriend. As it became known, the murder occurred on April 3 days before the media picked up this news, and it gained publicity. According to the autopsy results, Christian received a penetrating stab wound to the chest, which caused him fatal injuries. The blade entered the body to a depth of 7.5 centimeters, which indicates the force and intent of the blow. However, Courtney Clooney's behavior after the incident raised even more questions and outrage from the public. On October 8, just 5 days after she killed her boyfriend, the girl was spotted in a bar in Miami with her father. It seemed that she felt quite well and did not show any signs of stress or worries about what had happened. Such brazen and carefree behavior of a murder suspect is shocking and outrageous. It is hard to believe that a person who has just taken the life of their partner can return to their usual way of life so quickly, as if nothing had happened. This may indicate a lack of remorse, empathy, and awareness of the consequences of one's actions. One of the bar patrons who knew about the murder situation filmed a viral video in which she tried to shame and expel Courtney from the establishment. In the recording, you can hear the woman being indignant at the fact that the suspect in the murder came to drink and have fun as if everything was fine. This video quickly gained popularity on the web, and in the comments, people expressed the same feelings of anger and indignation at Courtney's act. Viewers could not understand how a girl who had cold-bloodedly killed her boyfriend just a few days ago could be so mentally balanced and carefree. Her behavior defied common sense and raised many questions about her true role and motives in this terrible crime. One of the most outrageous aspects of this case for the public was that Courtney Clooney was not arrested immediately after the incident. Instead of ending up behind bars, the girl continued to live her usual life as if nothing had happened. In June 2022, she returned to her hometown of Austin to be closer to her parents. There, Courtney bought a luxurious house worth almost $1.5 million and transferred the same amount to her father's account. People could not understand how a girl who had just taken another person's life could continue her existence so carelessly, as if nothing had happened. It seemed that Courtney did not expect any consequences for what she had done and felt absolutely unpunished. Another detail that constantly attracted public attention was the racial aspect of this case. A beautiful white girl killed her black boyfriend and did not face punishment for it. In society, and especially among Christians' relatives and friends, there was a growing sense of injustice and the existence of certain privileges for an attractive white woman. Racial inequality and bias in the justice system is a painful and long-standing problem in our society. When a criminal avoids punishment because of their skin color, status, or appearance, it undermines trust in the law and generates feelings of helplessness and anger among the victims and their loved ones. An interesting fact was that Courtney's father, as it turned out, was unaware of his daughter's account on the OnlyFans website. This is a platform where users can share explicit content with their subscribers for money. Considering that Courtney had huge wealth and could afford to buy a house for $1.5 million, the question arises, how did her father explain to himself the origin of this money? This detail adds even more confusion and suspicion to an already convoluted and chilling story. Did Courtney's father know about her real life and sources of income? Or was he perhaps part of some scheme himself or covering up his daughter's illegal activities? The long-awaited arrest of Courtney Clooney took place on August 10, 2022 in Hawaii, where she was staying in a rehabilitation center. The reason for her stay in the facility was substance abuse and post-traumatic stress disorder. After being detained, Courtney was taken to Florida, where the next day, August 11, she was officially arrested on charges of second-degree murder. Now let's consider the official version of the events of that fatal day and the timeline, according to the prosecution. On Sunday, April 3, 2022, Christian Obams left the apartment he shared with Courtney in Miami around 1 o'clock in the afternoon. Later, at 4:23 p.m., he returned home with sandwiches for himself and his girlfriend. An interesting fact is that shortly before Christian's return, namely at 4:01 p.m., Courtney was live streaming on Instagram for her followers. In the video, she was wearing the same clothes that the police later photographed her in after the incident. This detail caught the attention of many people working on the case, as Courtney's behavior seemed strange and inadequate. The fact that the suspect was acting so carefree and relaxed shortly before the tragedy raises many questions. Could she have been planning something terrible while being live? Or was it perhaps an attempt to create an alibi? Or maybe her strange behavior was the result of using some substances that affected her consciousness and actions. Many people had the feeling that Courtney was under the influence of psychoactive substances during the live stream. Her manner of communication, gestures, and facial expressions seemed unnatural and strange. This observation only heightened suspicions about her possible involvement in the subsequent tragic events. The question remains open. Was this live stream a spontaneous decision by Courtney, or perhaps part of some sinister plan? Was she trying to deflect suspicion from herself in this way, or create an impression of normality before committing a terrible crime? On that fatal day, Courtney noticed that Christian had turned off the location tracking on his phone when he went out for sandwiches. This detail became another reason for conflict, as jealousy and distrust were constant companions in their relationship. When Christian returned a few hours later, he turned the geolocation back on, but it did not appease Courtney. Obsession with a partner and the desire to control their every step are clear signs of a toxic and abusive relationship. When trust disappears and jealousy becomes all-consuming, it can lead to tragic consequences. Between 4:43 p.m. and 4:49 p.m., Courtney called her mother twice. The first conversation lasted 6 minutes and the second 7 minutes. And it was in the interval between these calls that the irreparable happened. Courtney struck Christian with a serrated kitchen knife. Courtney's mother claimed that she heard her daughter repeating that Christian was lying about something. This phrase may indicate a tense atmosphere and a conflict that was unfolding at that moment. Only at 4:57 p.m. did Courtney finally call 911, summoning an ambulance. At the same time, neighbors, alarmed by the noise, reported the incident to the building's security service, which in turn called the police. The delay in calling emergency services after a violent incident always raises suspicions. Why didn't Courtney immediately call 911 if it was self-defense? Every minute was worth its weight in gold when it came to saving Christian's life. It seems strange that between the attack on Christian and the 911 call, Courtney contacted her mother again. Perhaps she was seeking support or advice in this critical situation, while her boyfriend was bleeding out. When medics arrived at the crime scene, Christian had already lost a lot of blood. Despite all the efforts of the doctors, his life could not be saved. He died in the hospital. During questioning, Courtney categorically denied inflicting knife wounds on Christian. Instead, she claimed that it was Christian who attacked her, and she, defending herself, threw a knife at him from a distance of about 3 meters. According to her, she did not intend to harm him, but only wanted to scare him. Courtney's version of self-defense and accidentally throwing a knife from a distance of 3 meters seems highly doubtful. Firstly, hitting a moving person with a knife from such a distance is practically impossible without special training. Secondly, the nature of the wounds indicated a targeted strike at close range, not an accidental hit. The forensic expert who performed the autopsy on Christian's body also refuted Courtney's version. In his professional opinion, inflicting such a knife wound from a distance of 3 meters could only be done by a professional knife thrower, not an ordinary girl. However, Courtney continued to insist on her testimony. Interestingly, despite the seemingly luxurious and carefree life of the couple, there are several strange facts in their biography. For example, a few months before the incident, Courtney was behind on rent for the luxurious apartment. The matter went so far that on March 21, 2022, the Miami court issued a decision to evict her for non-payment. A logical question arises. If Courtney was really earning such big money, why couldn't she pay for the housing she herself chose to live in? There are also some facts from Courtney's past that draw attention. In 2018, another woman from Austin sued her for inflicting bodily injuries and material damage as a result of a car accident. This case was settled out of court, and in 2022, shortly before the tragedy with Christian, Courtney was arrested in Texas for driving under the influence. This was already the second such offense in her biography. Although these incidents are not directly related to Christian's murder, they demonstrate certain behavioral patterns and problems with the law in Courtney's life. A propensity for aggressive driving and alcohol abuse may indicate general instability and destructive tendencies. Friends of the couple said that at the beginning of the relationship, Courtney and Christian were truly in love and happy. But over time, their relationship became toxic and unhealthy. Constant quarrels, jealousy, insults, and even physical violence became common companions of their life together. The couple regularly broke up and got back together, unable to break this vicious cycle. Any little things could become a reason for conflict, such as Christian looking at another girl. Courtney, who abused alcohol, became especially aggressive and uncontrollable at such moments. Christian's friends noticed that due to constant scandals and insults from the girl, he became more withdrawn and distant. Courtney herself actively tried to isolate the guy from his family and friends. Acquaintances of the couple also told about repeated cases of physical violence by Courtney. She could push, hit, or even spit in Christian's face during an argument. Once, the girl even pushed him down the stairs at a house party. In moments of particular rage, Courtney would literally smash everything around her like a hurricane. Despite this, Christian continued to believe in the relationship and hope for the best. He wrote messages to Courtney saying that he loved her and wanted to work on the relationship. Moreover, when the girl's career took off, Christian became her personal assistant. He helped with the shooting schedule, organizing photo shoots, and so on. Courtney even promised him a percentage of the income from her OnlyFans page. Christian's behavior is a typical example of an abuse victim who continues to justify their abuser and hope for change. He was emotionally dependent on Courtney and could not break out of the toxic bond, despite the numerous manifestations of aggression on her part. From time to time, Courtney seemed to try to make amends for the violence with generous gifts for Christian. However, this was more manipulation than sincere remorse. Verbal apologies from the girl were out of the question. Instead, she created the illusion that expensive presents could compensate for the insults and pain inflicted, and Christian fell into this trap again and again. This pattern of behavior is a typical cycle of violence in abusive relationships. Periods of escalation and aggression are replaced by a honeymoon phase, when the abuser tries to make amends with gifts and promises to change. But without awareness of the problem and professional help, this only leads to an escalation of the conflict. Christian's friends also noted that the more fame and money Courtney gained, the less often she was sober. The girl abused not only alcohol, but also, probably, narcotic substances. This only intensified her unstable emotional state and outburst of aggression. One of the most shocking videos that sheds light on the true nature of the relationship between Courtney Clooney and Christian Obums was captured by a surveillance camera in the private elevator of their building. In the recording, it is clearly visible how Courtney repeatedly hits Christian in the face and also aggressively pulls his hair. At the same time, Christian does not resist and even tries to calm the enraged girl. This video recording is indisputable evidence of domestic violence by Courtney. The fact that such incidents occurred even in public places, such as an elevator, indicates a sense of complete impunity and lack of boundaries in her behavior. Christian's reaction is a typical example of an abuse victim trying to avoid escalation of the conflict by appeasing the aggressor. But the most shocking revelation was that 2 months before Christian's murder, in February 2022, Courtney cheated on him. It turns out that her own infidelity and guilt were the real reason for the morbid jealousy and control towards Christian. By projecting her own unfaithfulness onto her partner, Courtney was probably trying to justify her own destructive behavior. This betrayal became another reason for a scandal, during which Courtney grabbed a knife and tried to injure Christian in the face. Although she did not manage to hit the target, she cut his throat instead. The wound turned out to be quite serious, and Christian had to have stitches. In addition to physical violence, Courtney regularly kicked Christian out of their shared apartment and humiliated him with racist insults. This behavior is a manifestation not only of the toxicity of the relationship, but also of deeply rooted prejudices and discrimination. Despite all these alarming facts, Courtney's lawyers persistently tried to get her released on bail before the start of the trial. During the court hearings in December, the girl displayed ostentatious emotionality and cried in front of the jury. Her defense built a strategy on the fact that the murder of Christian was an act of self-defense, and Courtney herself became a victim of domestic violence. However, the judge did not succumb to these manipulations and denied release on bail. Attempts to present Courtney as a victim, despite numerous evidence of her aggressive and controlling behavior, is a typical defense tactic in such cases. Manipulation of emotions, attempts to shift the blame onto the victim, all this is designed to sow doubt in the jury and gain leniency. But the facts remain facts, and they are clearly not on Courtney's side. At the time of the tragedy on April 3, 2022, there was no doubt that it was Courtney Clooney who took Christian Obums' life. The only question that still needed an answer was whether it was a premeditated murder or an act of self-defense. Courtney herself continued to insist on her innocence and shift responsibility onto the victim. Currently, the girl is in a Florida prison awaiting the final verdict of the court. Her behavior during interrogations raises many questions and surprises. Before the investigator arrived, Courtney talked to herself and allegedly prayed for Christian, although her clothes were completely soaked in his blood. When the detective finally appeared, she apologized for her appearance, as if that was the biggest problem at that moment. Even stranger was Courtney's reaction to the news of Christian's death. When a law enforcement officer informed her of this news, she began to dramatically gasp for air and grab her head. Although people react differently to grief, her behavior seemed unnatural and exaggerated. And the most shocking moment was when Courtney asked to hug one of the investigators, as if seeking comfort and support from him. Courtney's behavior during the interrogation raises many questions about her mental state and the sincerity of her emotions. Her actions seem strange, inadequate to the situation, and possibly calculated to evoke sympathy. But knowing the backstory of her relationship with Christian, these attempts at manipulation look especially cynical and outrageous. Throughout the interrogation, Courtney kept repeating that she needed to hug her mom, that the detectives were joking with her, and that this was all just some terrible dream. She refused to acknowledge the reality of what had happened and take responsibility for what she had done. Christian's family, filled with grief and indignation, filed a civil lawsuit against Courtney. They demand compensation from her for all expenses related to the funeral and court proceedings. But most importantly, they seek justice and recognition of the suffering they endured through the loss of a son and brother. Courtney's lawyers, in turn, continue to appear on television and insist on the version of self-defense, portraying their client as a victim of circumstances. Attempts by the defense to present Courtney as a victim in this story look particularly cynical against the backdrop of all the evidence gathered. Even if we assume that there was mutual violence in their relationship, The facts indicate that it was Courtney who was the main aggressor and the toxic element. Her desire to control, humiliate, and dominate her partner cannot be justified by any circumstances. Undoubtedly, this case will long be the subject of discussion and research. Perhaps experts will never be able to come to an unambiguous conclusion about who is the main abuser in this relationship. But now, when Courtney is behind bars awaiting a verdict, her attempts to manipulate the system and public opinion look particularly unacceptable. Regardless of the final decision of the court, this tragic story should serve as a reminder to all of us about the importance of healthy, safe, and equal relationships. Domestic violence, toxicity, and abuse are problems that require serious attention and decisive action from society. We cannot allow such situations to remain without proper response and punishment for the guilty. Only in this way can we prevent new victims and build a more harmonious world for all. Friends, if you watched until this moment, then know that you are simply the best. I am immensely grateful to you for your support. Write your opinion about this in the comments and let's talk about it there, because I always try to respond to everyone. Perhaps you will like the videos that you now see and the suggested ones. I advise you to watch them as well, so I'm not saying goodbye. Take care of yourself.